I think it would be interesting to know your process about choosing a project. What do you do when you get a script?
I'm a freelance editor, so I have no, I'm not allied with any studio or any organization. I've done, over the 50 years I've been working, I've done a number of projects with Francis Coppola, from The Rain People through Godfather, through Conversation, Apocalypse Now. And then our lives diverged, and I directed Return to Oz, and then I worked for Phil Kaufman, so I can't predict. And but when I'm looking at a new project, I think of, do I recognize something in this project that resonates with me, but at the same time, does it have the potential to move me out of my comfort zone? In other words, reading this, do I think, I don't know that I can do this? It's interesting, but it looks dangerous for me. That's a good sign. And then the other questions are, who are the people in this, who is the director and what is the team? Because you're going to be spending a lot of time with, certainly with the director. So that there has to be a good feeling there. And then is there enough time and money to complete the project? What's your feeling about the resources of the production company? So those three things are important. Any two of those are almost enough. Sometimes you can't have everything lined up. You have to make a leap. And the film Tomorrowland that I did before Coup 53 was directed by Brad Bird, who's been a friend since the early 1980s, and the production company was Disney, so certainly the resources were there. It was starring George Clooney. It was a big $150 million movie, but the missing ingredient was the script. And I asked, Brad called me up and said, do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, send me the script. And 2 weeks went by and there was no script. So I said, what about the script? No, we're still working on it. It'll come, it'll come. And then more weeks went by, and we got closer and closer to the date. And I asked again. He said, no, it's almost on the way. And it's at that point you have to say, all right, what am I going to do? Because the script is very important. And yet I hadn't read the script. And it was at that point that I made a fateful decision, which is, okay, I'll do, you know, I won't say, Brad, I can't do this project unless I see the script. I didn't do that. And in retrospect, that was a mistake because there were big problems with the script, which is clear. I should have, you know, if you can't give me the script, there must be problems with it. But I didn't say that. And I worked on the film for 15 months, and then they fired me because Disney was unhappy with the film. And there's a Chinese expression that comes from Sun Tzu, the military general, that says, sometimes you have to kill the chicken to scare the monkey. And in this case, I was the chicken and Brad was the monkey. So Disney said to Brad, either you do this or fire Walter and get one of our editors on the film. And Brad made the decision to fire me. And that's actually how I became available for Coup 53. So in the end, it all was happy. But you don't like the experience when it happens to you, obviously.
Are you still friends?
With Brad?
Yeah.
It's complicated. It's complicated. As I said, it was there were signs unusual because of this. Add 2 more frames. You know, I was not used to that. That's trivial in comparison, but we'll see. You know. But anyway, that's a good example or a counter example of where two of the three, kind of the three legs of the stool, one of them was missing, and I made a judgment, and it turned out to be the wrong judgment.
I also heard that you time your scripts that you get 1 or 2 times before choosing the project.
Sorry?
You time
Yes. Yes, that's an exercise that I do. It's something I take on for myself, which is to time the script. And I do it both for my own internal reasons, but also as a way of positioning myself relative to the production. So I take the script and a stopwatch, and I look at the first scene, and then I imagine the first scene in real time. And I pace around the room, and I speak the dialogue, and I put the cups down, and I take the breaths, and click, 1 minute and 20 seconds. And then I immediately do it again. 1 minute and 32 seconds. Write those numbers down. Next scene. And it takes about 2 days to do it right, and you get into a zone. And yet, it lays down a layer of pigment, I guess. The film is already in me in a deep sense. And the reason other people don't do it is because it takes the time to do it. And yet I now have a database of all of the scenes with all of the timings, and I worked out a computer program that shows the differences, magnifies the differences where there are differences, and then I add the timings from the script supervisor, and then I compare all of these, and inevitably there are 5 or 6 scenes that rise to the top. The script supervisor's timings are very different than my timings. What's going on? And then I'll talk to the script supervisor and say, has the director told you something about this scene that I don't know? So I'm learning already deeply about it. And then as I edit the scenes, I add the time of the edited scenes to this database. And so there's kind of a rolling analysis of how long will the first assembly be. And within 10 days of shooting, I have a very good idea of how long the first assembly will be. And then I go to the director and say, the artillery shell says that this film will be 4 hours and a half of assembly. And, then a dialogue starts. Anthony Minghella's films were notoriously long in first assembly. English Patient was 4 hours and 20 minutes. Talented Mr. Ripley was 4 hours and 45 minutes. Cold Mountain was 5 hours and 10 minutes. And, it almost became a joke between us because of this wild thing. And the script supervisor on Cold Mountain gave me her timings and said, okay, Walter, here are my timings. You know the drill, wink, meaning this is double entry bookkeeping. These are the times I've sent to the studio that make the film exactly 2 hours and 20 minutes long, which is contractually what they said. So they're not real timings. This creates a whole other level of problems, because if the director has not signed off on the timings in his own mind, let alone with the studio, then anything can happen. And that's what happened with Anthony's films. Once he got into a scene, he allowed, understandably, the actors say, maybe it'd be good if I put the cup down here and then moved it over here, and then, things get longer. And that's just how he worked creatively. And it's just, you had to adapt to that. Very different from somebody like Fred Zinnemann or Jerry Zucker, very disciplined in terms of time. And the first assemblies of those films were 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's easy. My rule of thumb is that if a first assembly is 30% longer than the release of the film, then it's easy to get to that time, because 30%, a 30% overweight film can come down to fighting weight with diet and exercise, or the editorial equivalence of this. You just say, you don't need to do this, don't have breakfast, go for a 5-mile run, we don't need this scene because this scene duplicates something that we already know from this scene because of the actor's expression. When you were writing the script, you felt he had to say, I love you, but we already know he loves her because of the expression on the actor's face. So we don't need this scene. So those kind of things. But no major plot point will be removed. No character will be removed. If it's more than 30%, you have to do surgery. It's the equivalent of, you want to lose 2.5 pounds very quickly. You have 2 kidneys, you can live without one of them. So, zip. That's a brutal version of that, and not exact, because yes, you can survive with 1 kidney, but you're not healthy. Your immune system is compromised. But paradoxically, a film can be more healthy with the removal of superfluous scenes, even though those were scenes that in the writing of the screenplay, everybody thought, these are great scenes. They're essential, but no, we can lose them, and the film closes over them, and it's as if they're never there, and it's actually a much better film now than it was with them in it. So.
But how do you work with a director before shooting? Are you involved in shot lists and making decisions to make the editing better at the end?
I will read this is with fiction films. I will read the screenplay, and my technique for reading is to read at speed, so I don't stop. I read, and if I think anything, I make a little tick, good or bad. Just tick, turn the page, tick, tick, and then I finish. And now, having read the whole thing, I go back. Oh yeah, what was that first tick about? Oh yeah, I don't think he needs to. I'm confused here. Does he really think that she wants the job but doesn't? Something. So then I'll amplify that. Oh, I have another idea. Maybe you could do this. Just here's an idea that might save some time or money. And then another tick, I don't know what that was. If I can't remember it, it's not important. And then I write these up and hand them to the director. And sometimes the director will read those notes and say, Walter, thank you for these notes. I think I'm going to look for another editor. And that's good, because very early we know that it wouldn't have worked. But other times they say, these are great notes, thank you very much, and some of those ideas get incorporated into the finished film.
You also said that you don't watch any movies while editing. Is this true?
No, I do watch, but I don't, my default mode is not to watch any films.
Since Coup 53 took 9 years to make.
Well, I was on it for 4 years, and there was one gap of 9 months where we had to stop editing. But when I'm working on a film, I'm so in the tunnel that it's upsetting to me, and it's just my own personality. It's upsetting for me to watch another film, because if I see a good film, I think, oh, those are good things. Maybe we could do that in our film. But what's good in one film can be not good in another film. And then the reverse, which is, oh, they're doing the same thing that we're doing and it's bad. But what's bad in one film can be good in another film. So I prefer to not get infected with these ideas or keep them to a minimum. That's all.
How do you, in editing, define what is wrong? Like if a scene is perfect but still is not working within a movie, how do you do to define what to do to make the scene work?
or whether to cut the scene out or to move it.
Yeah, but I'm also like, cut it out, or like, you know, if 56 is not working, you can recut 14 and all of a sudden scene 56
Right.
works. But it's also hard to define what the problem is.
Right. The many examples of that. The one vivid example is the Fred Zinnemann's film Julia with Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave. We previewed the film, and it was clear that the audience liked the film, but that they were having problems getting with it. And we were editing it in London, but we previewed it in the United States. And flying back to London, I thought, what can we do? And I realized that the obvious, if looking at the screenplay and looking at the film, it was a memory that triggered a memory that triggered a memory that triggered a memory, and then the film began. So there was that kind of a thing. And it was too much for the audience because they wanted to know, where's solid ground here? Are you going to continue to pull the rug out from under us and go deeper? And my radar said that scene 3 in that list is a problem. Let's get rid of that scene, and then the audience will be able to get with the film sooner. And I proposed this idea to Fred Zinnemann, and he thought, well, okay, let's try Walter's idea, he said. And in the editing room, we were working at that point on a Steenbeck, and on film, obviously, 1976. And I was pulling the splice apart, taking the scene out, and Fred looked at what I was doing, and he said, you know, when I read the screenplay for this film, when I read this scene, I thought, I can make this film. This scene was reading this scene allowed me to connect with this story. And I suddenly stopped. It's like, well, what do you want? Do you want me to do this? And he said, no, go ahead. And so I took it out. The splices make a little screaming sound when you undo them. And the film closed over it. It's as if it never existed. And the film went on to be nominated for Best Picture and Best Editing nomination also. So you never know, but that it turned out, the question was, is that a heart scene? Because that's how Fred connected with it, or is it an umbilical cord scene? An umbilical cord is absolutely necessary in the evolution of the child, but we don't walk around with umbilical cords. Thank you very much, umbilical cord. You did your job. Cut. Take it out. And now we just have a little tummy button left. So that's the story of that scene, but it frequently happens.
How do you think the industry has changed from going from film to digital? And do you think it has been for the better?
Yeah, fundamentally, I'm glad we don't live in the world of film anymore, but there are changes. The biggest change, I think, from a production point of view, is that we don't go to dailies anymore. In the old days with film, you shot the film. There was no video assist. The camera operator said, good, but that's all the assurance you had. The film was sent to the lab, and then the next day we screened a work print, either at lunch or in the evening. And the heads of departments, the director, the cinematographer, the editor, whoever else, production design, came into a room like this and for 20 minutes or 2 hours watched what was shot the previous day. And in that screening, the only agenda was to look at what you had shot and to pick up the mood of the director and for the director to pick up the mood of the rest of the crew looking at this. And sometimes it's very awkward because there's some bad stuff in there. And sometimes it's very good because there's good stuff in there. But that can be misleading sometimes. Something that is very good in dailies cannot be good for the film, and vice versa. Something that looks bad ultimately may be very good in the finished film. So in those things, I have a laptop and I would type in the dark my initial reactions to what I'm looking at and what I'm picking up from. The director is sitting here and I'm writing in the dark. What is the director doing? Is the director sitting there like that? Or is he shifting around in the seat a lot? Anyway, that's all gone now. And because we think we have seen the material, because on the set there are these plasma screens that are looking at what the camera is looking at. And so everyone thinks, oh, I've already seen that. But you haven't really seen it. And you haven't seen it in an environment where you can pick up subtle mood distinctions between the director and the cinematographer, or the cinematographer and the production design. And so that's, nobody writes about this. I haven't read any articles about it, but that's, I think, I would discount any question about the quality of the film itself. And those, I think, are ephemeral things that will disappear in time and have already disappeared.
We're also moving into or evolving the editing style. This is actually a question from the sound designer I'm working with. And he's asking that we won't be able to cut, or it's about virtual reality, how we won't be able to cut like we have before without audiences reacting to things happening in the surroundings and interacting with the story they find more fascinating. What do you think will happen with the relationship between sound and edit in the new VR universe?
Before I answer that question, one more thing, which is the issue of cutbacks in shooting. So okay, action, and in the middle of the shot, the director will say, "Okay, stop. Go back to the line where you say stop it, and then go on from there, and try to be more intense." So the actors stop. In their mind, they go back to where was I? Oh yeah, that. Okay, okay, cut. Okay, just say that line again, but make it lighter. Okay. And Tomorrowland, there was one shot that had 32 setbacks in the shot. So it's basically one shot that has 32 miniature takes within the shot. And very occasionally in film we would do this, but digital, because it doesn't cost anything, allows you to do these setbacks. And it was emphasized again, I think, because Brad is an animator. He has a definite storyboard idea of how that line should sound and how it should look. And he's impatient to get that exactly the way he visualized it. But it was very tough on the actors, especially on George Clooney, who had a very difficult time with that approach to. I mean, you can think of every take as a kind of trapeze act between, especially when actors are interacting with each other. It's like the trapeze swings, I'm now in free fall, and I'm hoping that you will catch me, and then we'll do a double twirl, and then I'll go up and grab the tightrope and swing 3 times, and now in the air again. And that's the mentality of what's happening to actors in a complex multi-actor scene. They each need the other's support and strength to allow it to happen. And to interrupt that is to interrupt, it's like interrupting a trapeze act in the middle. Okay, stop, just, you're hanging in midair, go back and now swing further along. You know, it is very difficult for many actors to, it's a problem. So anyway, the answer to that question, virtual reality is in very early stages of its development, like lots of technology. When emerging technologies almost immediately turn to, they're very productive in real estate and pornography. And that's virtual reality is guaranteed to work for real estate of high-end houses and apartments and pornography. And so that's the driving force right now. Whether it will be good as a storytelling medium is, it's like film was in 1906, I think. We don't know. Certainly, the problem is that you, as the director, cannot control what the audience is going to look at, and you can't control the eye lines, so to speak, which is the bread and butter of cinematography. I can, as a director, control where people are going to look, and to a certain extent, what they're going to look at by how I stage things and how the film gets edited. With virtual reality, the only technique you have visually is how you're staging things, but it does give an opportunity for sound design to, especially if the sound is a binaural sound, 360 spherical degrees, you can put a sound over here and make people turn their head to look over there. So that's what's being investigated right now, I think. But I don't know much more than that about it. I'm not overly intrigued by it myself.
I mean, I would want to see a horror movie, virtual reality, but I guess that would be it. But that would be an experience for the audience with sound design. But also, like with this digital era, they are now using AIs to cut trailers. Should we be worried about our jobs?
Yeah, it's already happening. I was involved in this is probably 10 years ago, Google was putting something together that ironically they called Zoetrope, which was a AI program to take somebody's home movies of their vacation, and you said, you uploaded the files of your vacation, and you said, make this like a 1950s travelogue. And the AI would analyze the material and then edit it together provisionally to look like a travelogue from 1956. Or make it like an MTV music video from 1982, and it would do that. And the people who were doing this said, here's the problem is that people shoot this material, but they never have time to edit it together, and they don't know how to do it. What we've found through our studies of marketing studies is that if we had a program, which they were working, called Zoetrope, to at least provisionally cut it together, then they would show it to the consumer, the person who shot it, and the person would say, oh, that's great, except I need to see more of Uncle Marty. And so they would then allow the person to do some minor changes to the edit, and then that would be it. So it's happening.
So let's talk a little bit about sound design. I have gotten a couple of questions that I found interesting. In Sweden, usually for most of the movies, they are being cut and then locked and given to the sound designer. I don't know if that's how you work.
Sorry?
Like after the final cut, then that's when the sound designer in Sweden usually starts. And both editors and sound designers in Sweden, or in general, think that's a problem, how you can't go back and recut after mixing. How do you work?
Yeah, I absolutely don't like that system. And from the very earliest days, when George Lucas and I were working on THX, he shot the film, And then I was sound designing the film at night as he was cutting the film during the day. And then I would play the scenes with sound design for him. And then that would influence how he would cut the scenes. And then that would influence how I would sound design things the next day. So it was a constant feedback from editing picture to editing sound. So that's much my preferred way of working.
Yeah, it's also a question about pacing. The pacing changes a lot after putting sound into a cut.
Right. It also applies to music. If you gave me a magic wand, I would say the composer should be on the film during shooting and should be starting to write music during the shooting and make that music available to the editor while the editor is beginning to put, and this is what exactly happened on The Conversation. David Shire, the composer, Francis asked him to write the music for the film based on the screenplay. And David said, wait a minute, but you haven't shot anything yet. And Francis said, yes, but you write music for Broadway shows and all you have is the libretto and then you write the music. So pretend the screenplay is a libretto. And so he did. And so Francis was able to play the music for the film to the actors as they were acting, not while they were acting, but before the scene. He would say, oh, here's what David wrote for this scene. And Gene Hackman and Terry Garr could hear that scene, that music, and that would inform them about their own performance. Because in the end, the music for a scene is like another actor in the scene. And if the music is going to do that, then I, as an actor, don't need to do that. I can do this because the music will take care of that. The music will be poignant, so I don't have to be poignant. So that of course it was very valuable to me. I never had a temp track on that film. I was using the music, and then I would put the music in different places than David thought was correct, but show it to him, and he thought, oh, that's much better than I thought, and that would give him another idea. So again, there was this constant feedback between the music and the edit, each of them informing the other, and they grew together, which is an ideal situation as far as I'm concerned.
So if you're not doing sound on an edit that you're not working on yourself, how is that different for you? I mean, how is that different cutting a feature that you're not sound mixing or doing sound for at all?
Well, I almost always do the sound mixing, except when I'm fired. Then I don't do it.
You've also done a lot of recutts, both on your own movies and other movies. You would think that The Apocalypse wouldn't have to be recutted after you got nominated and for Best Editing for it.
Right.
What was the process there?
Well, that was the actor Christian Marcon, who played the plantation owner, had just died. And Canal Plus, the European distributors of Apocalypse, wanted a DVD extra of the French plantation scene to put with Apocalypse Now as a tribute to Christian Marcon. And so they proposed this to Francis and a budget to do this, and that was the origin of the Redux cut. But in the original editing of Apocalypse Now, the French plantations scene on film had been in the film, and then it had shortened, and then it shortened, and then it shortened, until finally it was like Alice in Wonderland with the Cheshire Cat, and only the smile was left, and then finally the smile was gone, and there was no trace of it anymore. So it didn't exist. We couldn't get the scene. So that meant that we had to go back to the original negative, which was in caves, stored in caves in Pennsylvania, and in boxes. And so we found out the code for the storage and had the boxes shipped to San Francisco. And now we were working on an Avid digitally. So we telecined the original negative of all of the French plantation material and sunk up the soundtrack There's a whole other interesting story there. So I recut the scene from basics, from nothing, I mean, just from dailies. And then Francis said, well, as long as we're doing all of this, are there any other scenes that were cut out? And so, okay, yeah, let's look. And so that grew. But then the original plan was still just a DVD, but a branching DVD where at the beginning of the DVD you would see the Nung River with various branches, which were the scenes that were deleted. And at the beginning you could choose your itinerary. I want to see the whole original film, but only the new French plantation, none of these other things. And that the DVD would be intelligent enough to then do it. But 20 years ago, the technology was not there to do that uninterruptedly. And so we abandoned that idea. We could do it today, but not back then. And then Vittorio Storaro heard about this, and he got excited because now he wanted to make a Technicolor 3-strip master of Apocalypse Now. The black and white, the old technology from 1930s. He wanted to bring this back as a way of preserving Apocalypse Now for eternity. And so that added a whole layer of complexity. And then that's how it happened. So it evolved from a very small seed, a DVD extra for France only, into Apocalypse Now Redux.
Well, there's also Final Cut that came out last year.
Yes, Final Cut, I had nothing to do with Final Cut, Apocalypse Now Final Cut. In fact, I didn't know that this was happening until very late in the process. And Apocalypse, the Final Cut version is the Redux version with a few scenes lifted. So other than that, there's no restructuring of it at all. And I saw the film in New York in March of last year, so about a year ago. And there was one cut that Francis made that I thought, this is a bad cut. So I met with Francis that evening and said, Francis, please put that section back. There's a terrible music transition there, and more to the point, you've cut out the moment that Willard decides not to be Kurtz. There's this big close-up where Willard has just killed Kurtz. He's got makeup on, and he's standing at the top of the stairs, and the music is going, and all of the tribespeople are bowing down to him, and it's like he could become Kurtz. And we linger on that moment. This is in the original film. And then he throws down the sword, and everyone else throws down the sword. And for some reason, Francis had cut that moment of decision out. And I said, why did you do it? And he said, well, the film seemed to be too long at that point. I said, no, it's the very important moment. Remember, the general back in the briefing scene had said, it must be a temptation out there among those natives to be God. And so you've removed the very thing that was predicted at the beginning of the film. And so he put that back. So that was my one creative contribution to Apocalypse Now Final Cut.
I was wondering, since you are both very involved in editing and sound design, now you are saying that you most do sound design, and yeah, you must working on a lot of projects where you work only with sound design and not edit.
Do I work only on? No, I don't. No, I always do both.
Okay.
I didn't on Tomorrowland because Tomorrowland I got fired. But every other film, I have edited picture and then done the final mix on it. I didn't do that on Coup 53 for various reasons to do with the workflow in London, but I certainly was there during the mix. And basically, I mixed the music, but I mixed it in a virtual sense. Robert Miller, who did the music, recorded the music in New York. He lives in New York, and sent us the files. He sent us a board mix of the final music for a certain section of the film, and then I put that in the film, adjusted its position, and then I did volume graph adjustments of the music to compensate for dialogue and sound effects and other things on this one stereo track. Then, a week or so later, he sent me the stems of that music, so 24 individual instruments and orchestral groupings, brass, violin, flute, solos, other things. And I copied the volume instructions for the stereo file and pasted them into all of the stems, and then listened to each of those instruments and did minor adjustments to the volume graphs for each of those stems. And then we exported that to the final mix, so that Martin Jensen, who is the mixer, is he from Denmark or Sweden? Danish. From Denmark, but he works in London. The music came up, and he didn't have to reinvent the wheel of adjusting the music to fit around all of the dialogue. I had already done all that. What he had to do was to arrange the music in the room through the speakers and then do an overall adjustment of the level, but he didn't have to do all of these fine-tune things. That had already been done. So in a sense, I did mix the music, but I did it at one step of remove. But it worked out very well. I did the same thing on Particle Fever, which is the documentary that I did back in 2013.
I was when you talked about the cutbacks and everything, which is not too good maybe these days. I was thinking about, what's your thought about ADR? Maybe it's not that complicated, but it's a little bit the same thing, that you take in the actors like 1 year later, and they don't have the other actors or the director. They maybe in a closet, and they should deliver the same stuff they did. And what's your generally thought about ADR? Do you like it, or do you hate it, or do you?
In general, I like it. Tagi, you began to really like it.
I've never done ADR in my life. I've never done a feature film, but I could marry ADR now. It was a real godsend on
it's good to think about it as a way of being able to steer the audience. I gave a few examples in the conversation of lines that we added. Those are ADR. It definitely is a problem for actors to get into it because between acting in the scene and doing the ADR, they may have done 3 different films in that time. And so this film, which the editor has been intimately involved with, as far as the actors was concerned, it's ancient history. Who was this? What was I? Oh, yeah, that guy. And so they're naturally nervous. I've found that if an actor comes into an ADR studio and says, I'm great at ADR, we're going to be out of here in a few minutes, you think, trouble. The best thing is somebody who is lightly apprehensive about this. And in that case, everything will go pretty smoothly. In general, I schedule about 8 lines of ADR per hour of recording time. Some actors are amazingly faster than that, others are not. But on average, if you're looking at, or we're going to do ADR for 10 actors, how many lines does each actor have? You divide the number of actors multiply the number of actors by the lines, and then divide by 8. That will give you a rough indication of how much time is going to happen. And I generally like to record with the same microphone that we use during production. Sometimes a shotgun microphone put way away. It's dangerous to put a big microphone close to an actor because they tend to react to that microphone as if it's a human head, and therefore they talk to it like I would talk to a human here. And yet in the scene, they're talking to somebody who's 6 feet away. So do anything you can to get rid of the microphone presence. Either use this kind of a microphone or a shotgun microphone at some distance. Apocalypse Now is 95% ADR. The only scenes that have production dialogue in it are the briefing scene with the generals at the beginning and then at the end with Marlon Brando. Everything else is ADR. And I was absolutely terrified that the film would sound like an Italian ADR Western. And so we thought deeply about how to avoid these problems and invested in this whole idea of using remote microphones and to get the actors into the mood. And they all did a tremendous job. And in mixing ADR, what I was sensitive in that film, I would say, this is a war film, and if this dialogue were recorded on production, it would be very difficult to get good sound. And so the first thing the production recorder would do would be to roll off the low end. So in mixing, even though I had a high quality voice, I would roll off the low end to approximate the difficulty of recording this. And then I paid a great deal of attention to where the person was relative to the camera. And so if the actor was looking at the camera speaking and then they turned 90 degrees, I would turn off or turn down the high frequency of that ADR and then turn it back up again when they faced into the camera, so that you'd get this sense that the dialogue was off camera axis when he was looking away, and then it came back on axis when he was looking at the camera. So there was a lot of very fine-tuning work going on there. But there's also a general principle that you can never shout loud enough. If an actor has to speak loud, their natural tendency is to, okay, I'm shouting now, I'm talking loud. And yet, when you put that in the film, it sounds fake. So you have to say to the actor, no, take it louder. Okay, now I'm louder. No, even louder. I'm not going to do it, but you get the idea that they have to really shout in order for it on film to come out as it really would be. Because, again, it's the psychology of being in a closed room. You fill that room up very quickly, whereas in an exterior scene, to make a shouted sound, you have to really shout loud. Anyway, I can go on for hours about ADR, but there's a great quote from Jean Renoir, who said that dubbing, basically ADR, he said, is the devil's work. And if we were living in the 12th century, a time of great civilization, anyone who dubbed a film would be guilty of preaching the duality of the soul and therefore would be burned at the stake. So Renoir was absolutely dedicated to the idea that whatever the actor said at the time of filming was it. The idea of replacing that voice was heretical because you are, again, preaching the duality of the soul. So I have been burned many times at the stake as a result of that. Yep.
You talked a little bit about, you mentioned temp tracks before, like that you didn't temp tracks, that you didn't have to use temporary music for the conversation, for example. Do you use that at other times?
I do. It depends on the film, and I use temp tracks on Coup 53. Robert Miller, the composer, is a composer who it's very easy for him to hear a temp track and not go crazy. I've worked with other composers who, even though I've temp tracked the film, they say, I don't want to hear the temp track, so turn it off. And I will decide about the music for the film. on Anthony Minghella's films, Gabriel Yared, similarly to David Shire, wrote music before during the shooting. So I had something to work with, written by Gabriel for English Patient, Talented Mr. Ripley, and Cold Mountain. I enjoyed doing temp music. There's always problems with it. That psychological moment that you remove the temp track and put in the new music is always psychologically a bruising moment, because something you've got used to is now different. It's like, you know, if you ride a bicycle, you get used to the way the pedals feel, and you get on somebody else's bicycle and the pedals feel very strange. And it just takes time for you to get used to the new pedals. So it's, but again, the best solution is not to have temp music at all, but we don't live in that world all the time. So. Yeah.
In editing, I find often the issues with the film can be about the point of view of the characters. Maybe it's a wide question, but can you say something about your experience, or about character point of view?
Yeah, it's again, I'm simplifying a lot, but you can look at every screenplay, every story, and say, with multiple characters, is this story convergent, divergent, or single point of view? Single point of view example would be The Conversation is a single point of view film. Talented Mr. Ripley is a single point of view film. Everything in those films is you're either looking at Gene Hackman or you're looking at something that Gene Hackman is looking at. There's never a scene where two other characters go off and discuss Gene. What is it about Harry Cole? I don't know. I think he had trouble with his father, you know, something. It doesn't happen. And this is useful, especially if your main character is a problematical character. Certainly with Harry Cole, he's not the ideal hero for a film. So one way to make an audience focus on this character is to give them no other options than to see what he sees from his point of view. So there's kind of a Stockholm syndrome here, where the audience has to adopt the point of view of this character because the film gives you no other options. Same with Talented Mr. Ripley. The hero, the main character, Tom Ripley, is in every scene, or you're seeing what he sees, because he's another problematical character. He's a serial murderer who seems charming on the surface, but is deeply troubled. And how do you get an audience to identify with him, in quotes? Well, you give them no option but to take his point of view, or get up and leave the film. Divergent point of view, a good example are Godfather and American Graffiti, in my experience. You begin the film with all of the main characters in the same Aristotelian space, and you see each of them relative to each other, and it's almost like they have name tags. Hello, I'm Michael. I'm the son who doesn't want to be part of the mafia. I'm Fredo. I'm the shiftless, slightly drunken, foolish brother. I'm Sonny. I'm the sexy heir apparent of Dad's mantle. And you get those very quickly, and you see them relative to each other. Once that's established in the audience's mind, then you can scatter them to the wind, and they can each have separate scenes, but it all goes back to the root from which all of these characters spread. American Graffiti has the same exact structure. You see all of the characters in the opening scene. You each get a sense of their identity relative to themselves and to each other, and then you can have a film with 4 different points of view, and it works. Convergent is where you intercut one scene with another scene that seems to have nothing to do with each other. English Patient is a good example of this. You have the Ray Fiennes character in the desert, in the plain, and the plane crashes, and suddenly you cut to Juliette Binoche on a train as a nurse in the middle of end of the World War II in Italy, and you intercut between these two separate things, and then there's a moment where the two of them come together, and she is the nurse who is helping the Ralph Fiennes character finding ultimately refuge in this monastery. And then that allows you to cut in time between the monastery and the backstory in the desert of how he got to be the burned patient. So again, it's a point of view analysis, and you can take almost any film and say, which one of these three things is it? Joker is a single point of view film. Again, for the same reason. The main character is an unsympathetic monster, but we have no alternative but to be with that character all the way through the film.
I have a question about getting fired from movies. I probably happen to a lot of editors because we're in a fragile position, and sometimes it's easier to get rid of the editor than the director, even though we did what the director wanted. And I love the thing with you scared a monkey with killing the chicken. That's a very good expression. But have you ever started to work on movies where the editor was fired and you had to continue? And if you've done that, did you speak to the editor on why he was fired or what happened? Or do you just listen to the studio and they say, fix this, that?
I missed the last, have I ever worked on a film?
Yeah, because then they use a new editor.
Where the previous editor got fired when they brought in you after.
And I am the new editor? Yes, I've done that a couple of times. I don't like doing it.
No, but you speak to the editor about what
Yes, I did. It's a tense situation. And it usually has absolutely nothing to do with the talents of the previous editor. It's some dysfunction within the family between the producer and the studio and the director, usually. That is a problem. And I've come in as the second editor, I think, 3 times. And, you know, I do the best job I can. And it's usually to help a friend, but I don't want to stay in that mode very long because your personality becomes infected with this you are the grim reaper who comes in to take over the corpse of a dying film, you know. So it's
because sometimes it's easy to come in and see something for the first time, and you see what the problems is directly, which the people who's been working on it for a long time is not seeing.
right.
So
I mean, there was an example. I came in on a film called Romeo is Bleeding with Lena Olin in it. Interestingly, Swedish situation. She was, as an actress, was replacing, I'm forgetting her name now, but an American-Italian actress. And the character she was playing was a mobster, a female mobster, kind of Sopranos type person. And they had asked Mona to be an American, Italian-American mafia woman. And it just was not working. She was Swedish and she couldn't, you know, that wasn't in her DNA to be this. And I came in to look at it, and my suggestion, which they accepted, was to make her a Russian mafia. And as it turned out, the Swedish actress trying to be American turned out to have a Russian accent. And so it fit perfectly, and her name was originally Mona DeMarco, Italian, but we changed it Mona DeMarkova, which means Mona the carrot in Russian. DeMarkova is carrot. And so we shot some more material of her, you know, going to the files, and we see her identity card, and it's all Russian and everything. So that was my contribution. other than just to take over a film that had been scrambled by all of this dissension and to try to unscramble it and then to superimpose this solution on top of it. So it's that's one of my tales from being in that position. That reminds me, actually, I'm going to show you one last thing. Look at this circle. I'm going to animate it, and look at the center of the circle, and don't take your eyes off the center of the circle. It lasts about 20 seconds, and see what happens. So look at the very center. So the illusion is that the wall of hands has a kind of an animation to it, which is in the opposite direction of the circle. And this has a name. It's called the waterfall effect. If you go hiking in the mountains and you see a waterfall, you look at the waterfall for 20 seconds and then suddenly look at the cliff to the side. The cliff will seem to be going in the opposite direction of the waterfall. And there's an occupational hazard to doing what we do, relates somewhat to your question, which is at the end of a project, the disorientation that takes over because the end is so sudden sometimes, and it's so intense right up to the finished moment, that at the moment after the project, our conditioning is that we have been, as editors and sound designers, we have been taking things that are coming in and we've been putting them in coherent places in a film. We are organizing coherence over and over again, and that becomes like the circles. That's the dominant thing for a year or so of our work. And then when that's suddenly removed, the world seems to be going in the opposite direction. There seems to be a great discontinuity, a great incoherence. So here's an animation for that. So at the beginning of a project, here you are, very happy. You're going to climb the mountain of the project. And here's what you imagine happening. Every day you get closer to the finish. And then finally, one day, you reach the top of the mountain and hooray, you're done. That's what you have in your mind. The reality, though, is that because it's ordinary, the climbing of the mountain in your body accepts it as a continuity, as horizontal. And so you're going along, even though you're climbing the mountain, because it's what you do every day, you normalize it, you horizontalize it. The problem comes at the end of the project. You are thrown into outer space for a few days. The project's done. You're great relief, but then you come back home and your wife says there are some bulbs that need changing, and the tuition for the school is, reality sets in, and you're in this strange mix. You know that on the one hand, you know that you've reached the top of the mountain, which is flat, but it all seems to be tilted because of this counter reaction, and so you think you're going crazy. And you have to watch out. If the craziness can take over, you will tumble off the edge of the cliff. But what happens is you wind up at the bottom of a new project, and then you start climbing the mountain, and it's all wonderful again. So it's a kind of seasickness that because of the discontinuity, I'm done, but the world is seemingly, instead of things coming to coherence, it's incoherent. And if you look at the news every day, there's lots of examples of incoherence, and they seem to get magnified by the process. It doesn't make it any easier, but at least if you know what's happening, you can kind of endure it, again, just like seasickness. If people who experience seasickness without any warning after a few days of it, they think, I need to commit suicide. I can't take this anymore. But if you know what's happening, which is a discontinuity between what your eyes see and what your eustachian tubes are telling you, you can kind of hold on because, okay, it's an internal thing, not external. So it's just, I give this to you as a kind of life raft to get you through these awkward moments that we all experience. And I wish somebody, when I was starting out, had this, given me this little hint about what happens to you at the end of a project. So thank you very much.